Well, folks, it seems the trade war drums are beating once again, and this time, they're louder and more ominous than ever. The global economy finds itself once again embroiled in a high-stakes trade conflict, a delicate dance of tariffs and sanctions that could very well tip us all into a full-blown economic crisis. It all started, unsurprisingly, with a certain someone with an affinity for Twitter and a tenuous grasp on international trade dynamics. That's right. President Donald Trump has enacted a 10% tariff on imports from China, and a 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico, triggering significant economic upheaval. Now, you might think a 10% tariff is a gentle nudge, a mere tap on the shoulder in the grand scheme of global commerce. But let me tell you, in the intricate web of international trade, even a seemingly small tug can unravel the entire goddamn sweater. And China, my friends, is not one to take a tariff lying down. In response, they've implemented a staggering 75% tariff on American products, sending shockwaves through various industries. From soaring car prices to disrupted supply chains, this clash is transforming global markets, leaving businesses scrambling and consumers holding their breath. So buckle up, dear viewers, because we're about to dive headfirst into the murky waters of this trade war. We'll dissect the 7 most significant consequences of this escalating economic brawl, exploring the ripple effects that are already being felt across the globe. Let's start with something near and dear to all of us, especially those of us who enjoy the simple pleasure of driving a car that doesn't sound like a dying walrus. The auto industry, my friends, is officially in the crosshairs of this trade war, and the casualties are mounting. That 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, yeah, that's hitting car manufacturers right where it hurts: their wallets. See, many car parts cross the US-Mexico border multiple times during the manufacturing process. It's like a very expensive game of hot potato, only instead of burning your hands, it's burning a hole in the already strained pockets of American consumers. Because who do you think ends up footing the bill for these increased production costs? You guessed it, the average Joe and Jane trying to buy a new car. Prices are soaring higher than a SpaceX rocket launch, making that shiny new pickup truck seem more like a distant dream than an attainable goal. And if you think buying American-made will save you from this financial headache, well, think again. Even domestic manufacturers are feeling the heat, forced to raise their prices to keep up with the inflated cost of imported parts. It's like a game of economic dominoes where one wrong move sends the entire industry tumbling down. And let's not forget about the potential impact on jobs. With production costs skyrocketing, some manufacturers might be forced to make some tough choices, like shifting production to countries with lower labor costs or, God forbid, automating jobs. And nobody wants to see a robot take their job, except maybe for that one guy who really hates Mondays. But hey, maybe there's a silver lining to this tariff storm cloud, right? Perhaps this is the kick in the pants the American auto industry needs to innovate, to streamline production, to finally ditch those clunky cup holders and replace them with something, well, less clunky. Or maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of a very bumpy, very expensive ride towards economic uncertainty. Only time will tell, folks. Now let's talk about something a little less flashy than cars, but arguably far more important in the grand scheme of things: rare earth metals. You know, those elements with weird names like neodymium and dysprosium that you probably slept through in high school chemistry class? Well, they're about to become a whole lot more interesting because China, my friends, has decided to use them as a weapon in this trade war. You see, China has a bit of a monopoly on rare earth metals, controlling a whopping 80% of global production. They're like the Saudi Arabia of obscure but essential elements, and they know it. And what do you do when you have a near monopoly on something the world desperately needs? You guessed it, you weaponize it. China has announced that it will be limiting exports of rare earth metals to the US, a move that has sent shockwaves through various high-tech industries. Remember those smartphones we all know and love, the ones we spend more time staring at than actual human beings? Yeah, those rely on rare earth metals for everything from their vibrant displays to their powerful magnets. And those electric car batteries that are supposed to save us from environmental Armageddon. Yep, those need rare earth metals too. So what happens when the supply of these essential elements is suddenly squeezed? Well, for starters, things get a whole lot more expensive. We're talking production delays, supply chain disruptions, and prices soaring higher than a pigeon trying to escape a hungry cat. Imagine your iPhone costing twice as much, or your Tesla arriving 3 years late. That's the reality we're facing, folks. But hey, maybe this is just a minor setback, a temporary blip in the grand scheme of technological advancement. Or maybe, just maybe, this is a stark reminder that relying on one country for such critical resources is like building a house on a foundation of jelly. It's wobbly, it's unstable, and it's probably going to collapse at the worst possible moment. Speaking of electric vehicles, it seems this trade war has decided to pull into the fast lane of the EV market, and it's shaping up to be a head-on collision. The US, in its infinite wisdom, has slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Yes, you heard that right, 100%. It's like they looked at the already complex and delicate ecosystem of the EV market and said, you know what this needs? A giant tariff-shaped meteor. Now on the surface, this might seem like a win for American EV manufacturers like Tesla, Ford, and GM. Less competition from those pesky Chinese imports, right? Well, not so fast. See, the EV market is a bit like a delicate ecosystem, and disrupting one part of it can have unintended consequences throughout the entire food chain. First of all, this tariff is going to make Chinese EVs prohibitively expensive for American consumers. And while that might sound great for American car makers, it could actually backfire by slowing down the overall adoption of electric vehicles. See, competition breeds innovation, and without the pressure of affordable Chinese EVs, American manufacturers might not feel the need to innovate as quickly or lower their prices. And that's not even considering the potential supply chain disruptions. Many American EV manufacturers rely on Chinese companies for essential components like batteries and electronics. So while slapping a tariff on finished Chinese EVs might seem like a good idea on paper, it could end up hurting American manufacturers in the long run. It's like trying to win a food fight by throwing your own lunch at the wall. Sure, you might get some splattered on your opponent, but you're also going to end up hungry and with a very messy kitchen. Chapter 4: Chip Shortage. The semiconductor crisis deepens. Remember that global chip shortage that brought the tech industry to its knees a couple of years ago? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because this trade war is about to make that look like a minor inconvenience. The United States has not only imposed increased tariffs on Chinese semiconductors, but there's also talk of restricting the export of materials essential for chip manufacturing. It's like they're playing a high-stakes game of poker with the global tech industry, and they're going all in with a pair of twos. Now, if you're not familiar with semiconductors, they're basically the tiny brains that power everything from our smartphones and laptops to our cars and refrigerators. They're the unsung heroes of the digital age, quietly working behind the scenes to make our modern lives possible. But these tiny marvels of engineering are incredibly complex and expensive to produce, and the global supply chain for them is about as fragile as a house of cards in a hurricane. So what happens when you disrupt this delicate ecosystem with tariffs and export restrictions? Well, for starters, get ready for even longer wait times for your favorite gadgets. Those new iPhones, gaming consoles, and electric cars, yeah, they're going to be in short supply and high demand, which means higher prices and frustrated consumers. But the real kicker is the impact on innovation. The United States and China are the two biggest players in the semiconductor industry, and this trade war is essentially forcing them to decouple. Now, some might argue that this will lead to more innovation as each country strives to become self-sufficient in chip manufacturing. But the reality is that the semiconductor industry thrives on collaboration and specialization. Trying to force a decoupling is like trying to separate two sides of a coin. It's messy, it's damaging, and it ultimately leaves you with two incomplete halves. Well folks, it seems this trade war has decided to go full-on oil wrestling, and the global energy sector is feeling the heat. China, in a move that surprised absolutely no one, has decided to retaliate against those pesky American tariffs by reducing its imports of American oil. Now you might think this is a bad thing for the US energy industry, and you'd be right. Remember all that talk about American energy independence? Yeah, about that. See, the US has become a major oil producer in recent years thanks in no small part to the shale oil boom. But here's the thing. A lot of that oil was being exported, particularly to China, which has an insatiable thirst for the black gold. But now that China is turning off the tap, the US is finding itself with a bit of an oil glut. It's like throwing a party and then realizing halfway through that you've vastly overestimated the capacity of your guests' stomachs. This oversaturation of the domestic market is driving down oil prices, which might sound like good news for consumers, but it's actually throwing a wrench into the gears of the American energy industry. Lower prices mean less profit for oil producers, which could lead to job losses and a slowdown in production. But the real intrigue here is how this is shifting global power dynamics. China, being the savvy economic powerhouse that it is, isn't just sitting around twiddling its thumbs. Oh no, they're busy strengthening their energy relationships with other major players like Russia and countries in the Middle East. It's like watching a high-stakes game of Risk, where alliances are shifting, territories are being claimed, and everyone is vying for control of the world's most valuable resources. Well folks, it seems this trade war has decided to play doctor, and the prognosis isn't looking too good for the American healthcare system. The US has, in its infinite wisdom, decided to slap a 50% tariff on Chinese medical supplies. Yes, you heard that right, medical supplies. It's like they looked at the already exorbitant cost of healthcare in America and said, you know what this needs? A giant tariff-shaped enema. Now, I don't need to tell you that medical supplies are kind of important. We're talking about everything from surgical masks and gloves to syringes and IV bags. These are the things that keep hospitals running, doctors operating, and patients, alive. But apparently someone in the White House missed that memo, because now these essential items are about to get a whole lot more expensive. And who do you think ends up footing the bill for these increased costs? That's right, hospitals, insurance companies, and ultimately, you guessed it, the American people. We're already struggling to afford healthcare in this country, and now we're being asked to shell out even more for essential medical supplies. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. But hey, maybe this is all part of a grand plan, right? Maybe this is the wake-up call the American medical industry needs to finally get its act together and start producing more of its own supplies. But here's the thing, boosting domestic manufacturing takes time, investment, and a whole lot of political will, none of which are exactly in abundance these days. As this trade war rages on, one thing is becoming abundantly clear. The very fabric of global trade is being reshaped. Remember when we talked about globalization, that grand idea of interconnectedness and free-flowing commerce? Yeah, about that. It seems those days are quickly fading into a distant memory. Like a nostalgic Polaroid picture left out in the sun, it's starting to fade. This trade war, with its tit-for-tat tariffs and escalating tensions, is accelerating a trend that was already underway, the fragmentation of global trade. Countries are becoming increasingly wary of relying too heavily on any one trading partner, especially one as economically powerful and, let's face it, unpredictable as China. It's like realizing that your entire retirement fund is invested in a single volatile stock and deciding to diversify your portfolio before it's too late. The result? A scramble to forge new alliances, diversify supply chains, and reduce dependence on China. We're seeing a rise in regional trade agreements as countries seek to strengthen ties with their neighbors. Companies are being forced to rethink their supply chains, shifting production to countries with lower labor costs or closer proximity to their target markets. Now on the surface, this might seem like a good thing. After all, who doesn't love a bit of healthy competition? But the reality is that this shift away from globalization is likely to come with some growing pains. Building new factories and establishing new trade routes takes time and money. And as companies adjust to this new reality, we're likely to see higher prices, supply chain disruptions, and potentially even job losses in certain sectors. So, there you have it folks, a glimpse into the chaotic and uncertain world of the 2025 trade war. As we've seen, this economic tug-of-war is having far-reaching consequences, impacting everything from the cars we drive to the phones in our pockets. The question is, where do we go from here? What are your thoughts on this trade conflict? Will it foster economic growth through self-sufficiency, or will it push industries deeper into crisis? Will we emerge from this trade war stronger and more resilient, or will we stumble backward into a world of protectionism and economic isolation? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this is a story that's far from over. Share your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for daily news updates and in-depth analysis. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.